Good morning, everyone. This is Mark Friedlander, the president of the Insurance Marketing and Communications Association, and welcome to today's webcast, Integrating Social Media in Crisis Communications Planning. Today's program will feature Gary Kimball. Gary is president of Kimball Communications, an Easton, Pennsylvania-based boutique public relations firm which specializes in the insurance industry and crisis communications. Gary is a former IMCA and longtime board member of IMCA. He has more than 30 years of experience in public relations and corporate communications. Throughout his career, Gary has helped hundreds of organizations in a wide range of industries manage crises involving financial issues, human tragedies, security breaches, bioterrorism, and other threats to reputation and brands. And in terms of our process today, you could submit questions at any time during this live webcast. There's a little text box you'll see under your controls where you could send in your question. We will accumulate all of the questions, and then Gary will respond to those at the end of his presentation. So at this point, let me introduce Gary Kimball.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks everybody for joining me today. Today, as Mark said, we're going to look at integrating social media into a crisis communications plan. And when I'm talking about a crisis, there's a wide range of events that could be considered a crisis. But for our purposes, it's really any event, disaster, situation that threatens your company's reputation and brand. They could be a natural disaster, a data breach, something that happens suddenly without warning, or they could be slower moving corporate crisis involving financial or human resources issues. But any crisis is a time of uncertainty, and I think it's very important as communications professionals to move very quickly to manage the flow of information. So today, if we take a look at the agenda on the next slide, I'm going to start with a brief overview of managing information in a crisis, and then talk a little bit about what the impact of social media has been on that process. And then getting into the heart of the presentation is going to be integrating social media into your crisis communications planning, and then looking at how that applies to different types of crises. Finally, we'll talk a little bit about social criticism when your organization is criticized on social media, and the types of questions you should ask yourself and trying to decide how you're going to respond to that. And then finally, we'll take the questions, as Mark mentioned. So getting started here, on the next slide, we're talking about managing information. I really think that in any type of crisis, how you manage information is absolutely critical. In some cases, the way your organization is perceived by your customers, shareholders, other audiences, that whole perception can change dramatically depending on how the crisis is handled. You can think of many examples of companies that maybe you never thought the same of because of how they handled a particular crisis. And if you don't move very quickly to present the facts and explain your position, then others are going to do it for you. And as we're going to talk about today, in today's world, with social media, that happens in a matter of seconds and minutes, not hours and days. So the words and images that other people might use and the accuracy of what they're using, may be out of your control. And what you want to do is control your messages in a crisis. So I think really the most important thing is to have a crisis communications plan. And I'll go under the assumption that everybody listening does have a crisis communications plan. That's part of their organization's overall crisis response plan. I think that's very important for every organization, and especially in the insurance industry where we're talking about risk. What a crisis plan does is you assess what the risks are, and then you create a plan around it. So in your crisis communications plan, protocols that allow you to move quickly are very important. And this is just the types of protocols, and when you get calls from the media who's handling it, who's your spokesperson, those types of things. And having an effective spokesperson is very important. And I think it's kind of interesting in a social media world as well to look at this, because you can think of who's the face of an organization at a time of crisis. And when somebody is speaking to the media, that person you get to know very well. On social media, it's very different, where it's a virtual presence. But here I'm just talking about overall crisis communications, and honest, open communication is very important as well. There's no room in today's world where it's very transparent for lying or trying to hide the truth. It's very important to be honest and open in what you do. It's also very important to be consistent. So your messaging needs to be integrated. What you're saying to your customers and to your shareholders and to your employees and to all of your audiences and to the media, that needs to be integrated, needs to be consistent. And whether you're a large carrier that has a large team, or you're a one-person department or two-person department, and it's the same rules, is it really needs to be integrated and consistent. And then finally is the ability to listen and adjust, because things don't always go as planned. So you need to continually evaluate how you're handling things, how people are perceiving your response, and then adjusting your strategy as you go along. So if we take a look at that as a more traditional crisis and then planning, and then look at what the impact of social media has, some of this is rather obvious. Today, information moves much faster than it ever did before. It's delivered from anyone, from anywhere. There's people writing blogs from their basement, and there's all the social media channels. So, information, it's not just everybody waiting for the 6 o'clock news or reading the next day's paper. I mean, this has been going on for quite a while. It's nothing new. And all of that means it's much more complex. It's more interdependent. In other words, what happens on social media can affect what is reported in the media, traditional media, and vice versa. It can be less reliable. I can use an example from 2007, which seems at a time when social media wasn't well established, but if everybody remembers the tragedy of Virginia Tech with the shootings, there was somebody tweeted names of victims that was not accurate. And so that was back in 2007. And all of this means that the flow of information that's happening that you're trying to control is much more difficult to control. And I'll show you a couple examples here. On this next slide, you'll see the photo of the U.S. air flight, and this is 2009, the U.S. air flight that landed in the Hudson River, left LaGuardia. Everybody probably remembers this, and this was 2009. The very first picture was on Twitter. So it already was having an impact back in 2009, very fast. In this case, it was accurate about what happened. And then if you look at the next one, this is 2013, and if you look on the right, JCPenney came out with a new teapot that looked like, bore a resemblance, which they didn't realize, to Adolf Hitler. And I think any brand that has their product juxtaposed with Adolf Hitler is not a positive thing. And what I think was interesting here is that it was picked up by, as you can see, who tweeted this was a news organization. So it is very independent. You have the advertising department that works on an ad promoting a product, and it goes up on the billboard. Somebody takes a picture and tweets it and makes its way into the traditional media. So suddenly you have a slight crisis at a very large retailer. So now, let's get into how you do integrate it, and I want to go through a few examples. The first thing I think that's really important, and this may again seem obvious, but it's not always in every organization, is that I think your social networks deserve equal time with all your other audiences. You have the media you're communicating through, your customers, shareholders, your board, your employees, your community, any regulators that you're dealing with. And I think your social networks need that equal time with them. For emphasis sake, I made the social networks a little bubble here, a little bigger than the others, but it's meant to be equal. And the point is that you can't treat it, and management can't treat it as secondary, because it can have a tremendous impact on how your organization communicates during a crisis. So by equal time, now on the next slide, what I mean is that your social media manager is part of the crisis team, that whoever is managing social media, and this might be one person who's managing for small organizations, who has, wears several hats, but the manager needs to be part of your crisis communications team, and really your organization needs to dedicate resources to this, and that comes with planning. When you run through and you plan, well, this type of crisis could happen, here's how we're going to respond, here's how we think it's going to go, and you can think through what types of resources you're going to need. Do you need one person? Do you need two people? Who's going to be monitoring, who's going to be posting, what's the approval process like, all of those things. But you need to make sure that you have the appropriate resources. And you need to have those protocols, as I was just talking about. What is the approval process? How are we going to integrate it with our traditional media activity? And that all needs to be figured out ahead of time, because if you need to figure something out in the midst of a crisis, odds are that you're not going to do it as well as if you had planned ahead. That person who's handling social media needs access to critical information, just like the people who are dealing with the traditional media, just like the people who are communicating with customers, and they need to be able to move as quickly as everybody else. The next point in integrating is about messaging, and I think messaging is critical. And I think this is a good example. If any of you remember this, there was a case a few years ago with Progressive where there was a high-profile claim of death in an auto accident, and there was some question about how Progressive was paying the claim and handling it. And on social media, they got criticized rather heavily. And when they responded on Twitter, what you see here is a response, and I want to begin just by saying I'm not picking on Progressive. They're a great company. It does a lot of great things from a marketing perspective. But in this case, as you see, they took their corporate statement. This is a tragic case, and our sympathies go out to Mr. Fisher and his family for the pain and then if you clicked on it, it took you to the full statement. But the message isn't really appropriate to a social media audience. And if we look at the next slide, what I mean by that is it might have been consistent with what they were doing from a media relations standpoint, but it's not appropriate to the social conversation. Now, if you're dealing with a claim situation, and especially one where you're dealing with a death, you don't want to be too casual in your response, but there still is a way to word things that's a little more appropriate to the social conversation. You definitely want to be open and honest, because candor is expected on social media, and an authentic voice is critical. So I think these are things that are rather easy to do when you're using social media to promote your organization, but when it comes the time of a crisis, trying to maintain that authentic voice and make sure it's appropriate to the situation is critical. And I'm going to come back to this in a minute when I'm talking more about the planning process. But on the next slide is, I think, choosing your social media manager. Now, Tony Hayward at BP was the CEO. He wasn't a social media manager, but I'm using this as a way to demonstrate that you need the right person to do this. Now, Tony Hayward proved that he wasn't the right person to be the front person for BP in a crisis. He said a lot of things. He wanted to get his life back. I mean, they were very well publicized, and he eventually stepped down from that position. And my point in this is that you want to choose your social media manager very carefully, just like you want to choose whoever's going to be out in front of the traditional media very carefully. And some of the rules that I think you need to look at in choosing your manager on the next slide is you know, it's not the intern. When people started adapting social media into their communications, you know, I saw a lot of our clients who would, oh, we'll just get the intern to do it, or you find the youngest person in your group who would handle social media. And I think that by and large, as the years have gone on, people have realized that you don't just need the technical savvy and having a millennial do it, but you need somebody that has communication skills, because ultimately, and especially in a crisis, the communication skills of the person on social media are really important. And they need to be part of the overall communications team so they see what they're doing and how it fits into the overall scheme. The next part is listening, and social media. What I put here is I threw up some social media management tools, some traditional clipping services. I mean, I go back to the days, you know, when we used to get our clips that were cut out of the newspaper and stuffed in an envelope by Burrell's and mailed to us, if any of you remember those days. And now you have some of these giants like Cision and Vocus and such, where it's, you know, it's all electronic, and they're integrating with some of the social media monitoring as well. And some of the tools, you know, are more scheduling tools like Hootsuite or Sprout Social that were created to you know, schedule and manage multiple social media platforms. But, you know, they also have monitoring functions as well. And, you know, you have the giants like Radian6 that some of the larger insurance carriers use, you know, which was so effective and so successful, they got bought by Salesforce. And I think social media plays a critical role in your overall ability to listen and evaluate through a crisis. So if we move on to the next slide, and if anybody hasn't noticed, I'm not advancing my own slides, so I apologize for that. But anyway, on the listening, I think social listening is a key to overall monitoring of opinion during a crisis, because it can give you a lot of insight into what your customers are thinking, what the media is thinking. So it's very, very important as a listening tool. And I think, you know, you need some type of management tool, and you need to figure out what serves your needs the best. And it should be integrated with your media clipping service, your website analytics. All of that should be integrated. But as you do that, don't ignore live monitoring and alerts. You need to have somebody monitoring where your company's being mentioned, and you need to have alerts set up so you know that throughout a crisis. It's a time when it's all hands on deck, and it's 24/7, and you know, your social team needs to be integrated with the whole communications team. And then, as a result of that, adjusting your communication strategy as needed. And then finally, in talking about planning in integrating social media, if we look at the next slide, here's the Progressive case again. And the point I want to make here is Flo's smiling face works great on marketing, on television ads, but as their icon for Twitter, a smiling face talking about a death, I'm not sure it was the right thing to do. And they took heat for this as well on the social channels. There was conversation about it, and there was whole websites that went up just talking about this. And I think the point that I want to make about planning is that you really need to consider all of your contingencies. And I think to back up real quickly, when you look at it, creating an overall crisis response plan, and you can go to the next slide here, overall crisis response plan, I mean, it usually begins with a vulnerability analysis. You figure out where is your organization vulnerable, and then you start to plan your response. And there's the logistical part of it, and then there's the communications part of it. So I think in the communications part of it, as you're going through your planning, and you think about, well, how is this going to go? And you would look at that smiling face and think, well, maybe sometimes we should use our logo, or we should use something else as our social media handle, the icon there that you know, would represent you in a crisis a little bit differently. It's just those little things. And I think what it comes down to is running scenarios of the different types of crises that will test your vulnerabilities and see how your whole team is going to work together. It's great to put together a crisis communications plan, but if you never actually walk through some scenarios and figure out how it's going to work, you're not going to know. So to summarize some of the points in integrating social media, I think, as I mentioned on the next slide, equal time in the communications, crisis communications process. Social media is part of our communications landscape now, and it needs to be treated as equally as everything else. The messaging needs to be consistent with all your other messaging, but it also needs to be appropriate with that authentic voice that's part of social media. Your manager should be an effective communicator, somebody who can handle this type of environment, and the listening that you do through social media can help your entire communications effort. So make sure you have some good management tools that can do that, and that you have the resources ready at a time of a crisis in order to monitor as you should. And then finally, you need to plan and consider all the contingencies involved. So moving on now, I want to talk about how these fit in and show you some examples in different types of crises. I mean, and there's so many, and even if you look at a disaster, I mean, a disaster can be a lot of different things. It could be a terrorist attack in your city. It could be a natural disaster, and a natural disaster on the East Coast is more likely to be a hurricane versus on the West Coast where it's an earthquake. So every organization is different. Everybody has their own vulnerabilities, and I think that's why planning is so critical. In the insurance industry, claims and service issues are are things that come up quite often. Social media induced emergencies, which is a new one. Financial crises, human resources, cyber breaches, and others. So let's go through and start with talking about disasters a little bit. I like this example when last summer when Southwest Airlines, one of their planes made a hard landing at LaGuardia Airport in New York. They immediately tweeted, stand by for more information regarding Flight 345. We're gathering details and we'll post a statement soon. This is classic. You tell people what you know and then tell them what you don't know, and that you're going to follow up and let them know. So Twitter, and I think in a disaster, has social media is used widely. It's used by emergency management organizations. It's used by police departments. It's used by everybody because people are on social media, and it's a great way to keep people up to date. If we look at the next one, which was their Facebook page, And this was a little while later. They confirmed that emergency responders were there, and they're going to provide more details when available. And then you can see some of the comments down below. 4,987 people like this. I love that Southwest actually comes out and tells us first without waiting for pressure from the media. I was on the flight and would like to say that we are all okay. So you have that interaction, you have that two-way communication going on with the audience. So in any type of disaster, whether it's a natural disaster or it's something involving an outside, outside threat, social media should be a primary part of what you're doing, because that's how people are used to getting their updates, and it's a way that you should do it. So if we look at the next one, just to summarize about disasters, you want to keep your audiences up to date on the status of what's going on and the steps that are taken. Like you do in all crisis communications, you only communicate factual information. You don't speculate on anything, and you want to verify that everything is accurate before you're putting it up. And I have this in quotes because we use it a lot. Tell them what you know and what you don't know, and that's just what you saw. Here's what we know, and we'll let you know when we know more. Finally, sensitive information such as names of victims is not appropriate. That's the kind of thing where you let people know when you're communicating separately offline with those people. So I think, again, in any type of disaster, it's kind of a no-brainer when you look at using social media, because it is really a standard now for how it's used in a disaster. If we move on to the next, and the claims types of issues, that if there is some type of, whether it's low profile or high profile, if it's a service issue, if it's a claim issue, that this may not be a crisis, but it could well emerge into being one, and it's likely to be a subject on social media. I mean, people now complain about companies on social media, and anybody who's done it knows that they often get a quicker response when they put something on social media and use a company's Twitter handle rather than trying to call an 800 number and try to get a response. And I think the expectation now is that you need to be able to respond to these things. And in doing so, I think you need to work with your claims teams and your legal counsel and everybody and know what the privacy rules are, what can be said, what can't be said, and come up with some protocols for handling that ahead of time. Because your aim should really be to de-escalate these situations. And the way to do that, what's traditionally done, is you acknowledge whatever the issue is that somebody has raised on social media. You acknowledge that you can't speak about certain things, if that's the appropriate thing in that situation, and then you try to take any individual sensitive issues offline. And again, this is nothing new. Companies have been doing it for the last 5 years or so, where you simply put that you can contact us at this number and we'll talk to you, or if you have their contact information, you contact that person and try to get it offline. So the conversation, the negative conversation, is not happening online. If you can repeat your company's commitment to service and claims, as long as the event can be put into context, that's a great thing to do. And as I always like to say, don't get into a public pissing match. You don't want to argue with people online and debate some of these issues. It's not usually going to work to your favor. You're just perpetuating a negative situation. So if there's a way to take the individual issue offline and just acknowledging it and telling people that you are handling it, then that's a much better way to go in a situation like this. Looking at the next type of crisis that could happen, I love this example with the Red Cross, where somebody, their social media manager, mistakenly tweeted something. She meant to tweet from her own personal Twitter account. Instead, she she did it through Hootsuite, and she tweeted it for the Red Cross. And I'm sure anybody who was relying on aid from the Red Cross wouldn't think too highly of getting something talking about her getting slizzard. So if you look at the next slide and how they responded at the top, you'll see how the American Red Cross responded. We've deleted the rogue tweet, but rest assured the Red Cross is sober and we've confiscated the keys. It was humorous, it was appropriate, and it was well received. And if you look below, there's a social media manager confirms with a sense of humor what she did. I wasn't actually getting slizzard, but just excited. This blew over, and it didn't create much of a big deal. It was a mistake, and those types of things happen. So I think if you look at and in dealing with organizations that have something happen on social media that's embarrassing, if we go to the next slide, you'll see, I think the important thing is don't panic, because often people do begin to panic because so many people are seeing a tweet or a Facebook page or something on Instagram or on LinkedIn. So they immediately panic, and there's really no reason to. There's a formula for handling it, which is just to acknowledge the mistake, as the Red Cross did there. Try to have a sense of humor where appropriate. There's some cases where it's not appropriate. We can go to the Aflac example in the insurance industry, when after the tsunami in Japan, where their spokesperson was Gilbert Gottfried, the comedian, who made some just horrible off-color jokes about Japan, and was fired. And he did it on social media and was fired by Aflac, and Aflac did not make jokes about what he said because that wouldn't be appropriate. And then with anything, then you don't harp on the issue that happened. You want to move back to your normal activity, your normal social media posting as soon as it's possible, as soon as it's appropriate. Next type, and becoming more and more common, is when social media accounts are hacked. This does happen very often now, and this was one that happened where Burger King's Twitter page was hacked in 2000. I think it was 2013 or 14, and whoever hacked it put up McDonald's information, and it says Burger King Twitter account just got sold to McDonald's because the Whopper flopped. And anyway, if we go to the next one, what happened as a result of it was Burger King had a sense of humor. They as a result of this. So they simply said, interesting day here at Burger King, but we're back. Welcome to our new followers. Hope you all stick around. And then they went back to their regular activity. But having social media accounts hacked, I think, raises a few issues. And if we look at the next slide, I think more important here is to have a plan to deal with hacked accounts, and that involves your social media team, your IT department, and everybody else. So it starts with prevention, and it's starts with changing your passwords quite often on your social media accounts. It starts with not emailing passwords for your social media accounts, taking some preventative steps like that to prevent hacks from happening. The security measures, knowing in advance how you're going to respond. I mean, the first thing that you're going to do is change your password once you've been hacked. You need to notify your followers. If you're using a third-party app for some, like Hootsuite or something like that, you need to disconnect those and make sure that that's not where the problem's coming from. But the response, as you saw with Burger King, is often, yes, we've been hacked, you need to let everybody know, and then you just let them know when you're back up and running and everything is good. And kind of similar to what I was saying before, when it's a social media-induced crisis, and I'm not sure this is a crisis, is not to panic and acknowledge what happened and just get back to your normal activities. And that seems relatively straightforward. What's not as straightforward is the type of crises that I'm going to talk about next, which is financial human resources type. Now, these are very sensitive issues. It can be a financial loss. Say your company, is about to announce a $100 million loss for the quarter, or there's something else going on. Their AM Best rating has been dropped, or on a human resources side, your chief executive officer or some other senior person is being accused of sexual harassment, or is all of these things I've actually experienced, so they're real examples. Some of them before social media was present and some after. And these are issues that I think aren't as easy or should not be handled as much on social media as others. Some might disagree with me, but I think if people are talking about it, I think that you have to acknowledge these types of situations. You can't just ignore things that people are saying. You want to direct people to other sources, and I'm going to, in the next part, after we talk about this, the next part I'm going to talk about the cyber breach at Anthem last week, and I'll explain how they directed people to other sources. So you basically want to acknowledge it online, show people where they can get the information that they need, and as long as it's true, reassure them of, because in any kind of financial or human resource issue, you want to reassure people that the company is stable, that you're okay, you have a plan, and that everything's going to go back to normal. And then get back to your regular social media posting as long as it's appropriate, again, as soon as you can, because that's also a signal that things are back to normal at the company and that there's no reason to worry. So I'm looking at the time, and I think we're good here. So if we go to what happened at Anthem last week, large health insurance company, and they were the victim of a cyber attack, as they mentioned here in their very first tweet about it, and they have them numbered. Was the victim of a cyber attack, no evidence, medical or credit card information was compromised. More at anthemfacts.com. So they, and I would imagine they had to have had some of this prepared ahead of time in case they were hacked, in case they were breached. And cyber breaches are something which everybody has to take seriously now, no matter how large your organization is, because it's happening with increased regularity. It's not just the Targets and Home Depots and large retailers. It's every type of company. And if we go to the next slide now, you'll see how starting at the bottom, this is the way, what they said in the first one was not true. Data access may include names, health ID, social security number, birth date, address, phone, email, employment information, etc. More at anthemfacts.com. So as I was saying, you create something where people can go and look in more detail. They continued about affected members will be contacted, telling people that if you were affected, you will be contacted, and we'll take care of everything. Again, the sensitive information that you can't talk about on social media with individuals, you take offline. And finally, their last one in this series was, we take information security seriously and are working with the FBI and security firm Mandiant to determine who's responsible. Here they do a couple things. One, tell everybody who they're working with to make sure everything's going to be okay, and they recommit their and they reaffirm their commitment to security, that they do take it seriously. So I think they did some good things here. I wasn't as crazy if we look at the next slide with what they did after that, which was the same day, and then the next day they gave themselves a little pat on the back that the FBI had praised them for, and that they were quoted in the Wall Street Journal and LA Times about that. I think it's okay. I didn't see any backlash on that, but I don't think I'm not sure patting yourself on the back after a major breach where your customers' sensitive information was released would be is the right place to do this. Again, that could be debated by others, but that is my opinion on that. So if, just to summarize on cyber breaches, obviously the first thing you want to do is alert everybody, tell customers what they should do, tell them about steps that are being taken, look for any positives, that you're working with the FBI or whoever, and then gradually integrate your regular activity back into your social media activity. Don't, harp on anything for too long. So then finally, what I want to look at a little bit here is, when you are criticized on social media, and this is a tough thing. When somebody posts something and it's on your site, a lot of times people just want to delete things, and that's not really the nature of social media. It's a two-way conversation, and that's when it works best, and that's when all communications work best. So don't be in a rush to delete things. If there's any profanity, any harassment, anything that borders on or is against the rules of social media, this should all be part of a social media plan and policy, including an employee policy, which everybody should have for their employees. And you need to know the rules and working with your IT folks and everything. And how are you going to contact Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn and let them know that something that's being said about you is against their rules and that it needs to be taken down. And that's something that you need to have a plan and need to know what to do, because what you don't want to happen is to have something here and then suddenly you got to call into your legal counsel and you got to do this and you have to try to figure it out. You can't, the time to plan these things is not in the middle of some type of crisis, it's beforehand. Look at it as an opportunity. Now that may seem strange to say, but I think with anything that happens, it's an opportunity. Whenever there's any type of crisis, there's also an opportunity. I mean, it's a very difficult time to get through, but it can also be an opportunity to establish yourself. I mean, if you look at, I'll go back, and this is way off the insurance beat, but way back to 2000, to September 11th, when those planes hit the World Trade Center, and you look at Rudy Giuliani as mayor, and he just became, and he almost, made it to the White House as a result of how he handled that. And he really was in charge. He was relaxed. He calmed people. He, did what was necessary, and it was an opportunity. So in your organization, it's an opportunity to show that your organization can handle things, and that you handle it well. And people often will raise their opinion of your organization because of how you handle it. So when there are criticisms on social media, I think some of the questions you have to ask in order to determine how you're going to respond is, one, what's the source and influence of that particular post? Is it somebody in their basement who has 5 people reading their blog with no influence? Or, is it in the Huffington Post or something like that? Is it an isolated post, or is it something that's spreading? So sometimes you don't want to respond immediately. You want to listen and see what's going to happen with that. But you ask yourself these questions, it'll help determine what you're going to do. If you do respond to something, are you going to perpetuate a negative conversation? Or so that's another question that you need to ask yourself. And can you take it offline? Is this the case that you can take it offline? I can give you. I think we're getting up to the point where we want to take questions. I'll give you one example. Last year, right about this time, there was a hotel that we were working with, and on Valentine's Day, which was on a Friday night, they had a full house. It was a new hotel. They had a restaurant on the lower level. The restaurant was full. They had full the capacity there, and a fire broke out on the roof. didn't do a lot of damage, but the sprinklers went off and everybody had to be evacuated from the hotel. Their response when we were contacted was the media was very easy because it was located in a part of the country that was it wasn't a big media market, so that was pretty easy to we created talking points. We actually put out a press release the next day that answered all the questions. The media coverage was relatively good, and then the social media started, and what we did was make very consistent messages, and on their Facebook page and the tweets, we continued to give everybody updates about what was going on, and all very quickly. And then came, like a day later, came one or two people who immediately said, I didn't like the way this was handled, what about this and what about that, which kind of put into question, did the hotel really handle it well? Were they really reimbursing people for what they lost, and all of that? And what we did was they were able to, from the social media posts, know who those people were, and they posted something, what we wrote, was very, I don't want to say generic, it was, we've tried to do the best, through a very difficult situation. We're going to be in contact with you immediately to make sure, and then they had the people's, because they stayed there, their contact information, and contacted them offline and settled everything, and it really went away very quickly. So I think, how you handle it is asking yourself these kinds of questions can really help. And that, I think, takes us to questions. So, Mark, I don't know if you want to jump in and tell.
Yes. Thank you, Gary. I appreciate that. We did get a couple questions, and folks still have time. Everybody who joined the webcast today has time to send in questions via the text box, the question text box on your control panel of the webcast site. But the first one was, somebody asked early on, will the slides be available? And I think easy answer on that is,
yes.
One, we are going to make the webcast available, the full webcast, as an archive, and with Gary's permission, we certainly post the slide deck on IMCA's website. So if that's okay with Gary, we'll certainly try to do that as well, because folks want to look at the slide deck specifically. So if that's okay, we'll certainly move forward with that. The next question was your thoughts on responding too quickly or making too much out of a crisis, making it too big a deal. Maybe it wasn't a crisis yet, but based on the response of the organization, it may turn into a crisis because of the way it was responded to. So, Gary, why don't you focus on that a little bit?
Okay, and I think that's I think that's what I was talking about at the end about listening and trying to figure out what's the source, what's the influence, is this isolated or spreading? And I was talking about just social media, but you can look at that throughout your different, you can look at that more holistically in that in any type of situation when something happens, whatever it is, whether it's a human resources issue or a financial crisis or it's somebody posted something on social media, I mean, the first thing that you do in crisis communications in general is to evaluate what's going on and try to determine all the facts. And whoever asked the question is absolutely right, is you can respond too quickly, I think, both on social media and in general. I work with youth organizations through a particular insurer, and their types of crises can, usually involve unfortunately, the loss of life or some situations like that. And the phone calls that we get within the first hour are usually very different from what actually happened. And we always make sure to get all the facts first. So I think you can respond too quickly, but you need to evaluate and look at what's going on and watch it carefully. I think what your response can be, if you're not sure about the nature of it, how serious it really is more of a, if you've ever used a holding statement, for the traditional media is the same kind of thing, that you're looking into something, and as you find out more, you'll let people know. Now, it's kind of a general question, so it's hard to be too specific, but I think it's important to look at it and ask yourself those questions. Is this an isolated case? Where is it coming from? But I think it's absolutely true that you should not respond too quickly, and if you feel like there's some activity is growing on social media, then you should respond, at least to say that you're looking into something.
Great, thank you, Gary. We have another question that's come in. In the case of Progressive's standard response, do you have recommendations on how to handle situations where legal privacy issues prevent too much detail?
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes to taking issues offline, and knowing what you're going to do ahead of time. I don't work at an insurance company. I have a public relations agency, so we don't have those types of issues. But I know every insurance company does have legal counsel, and I think it's sitting down ahead of time to figure out what are those issues, what can you say, what can't you say. I've seen, a few situations where I haven't seen anybody say too much. I have seen people say too little, but I really think it's important to have those types of general statements that, one, reaffirm your commitment to service and claims and all of that, and as long as it's accurate. I just got to qualify what I'm saying is sometimes, if your company has done something wrong and a claim wasn't paid properly, I mean, those are the facts, and you can't change what happened. I think these days it's gotten very common for people to acknowledge and to see that people will apologize for doing something wrong, as long as you tell them what you're going to do to make it better in the first place. Now, if there's any lawyers on this call, they might be jumping up and down and saying, no, you never acknowledge that you did something wrong, because then if there's litigation, you're opening yourself up to problems. But I think that's why this needs to be an integrated process, that with your claims team and your counsel and your communications people, to figure that stuff out well ahead of time.
Good. Okay, the next question, Gary, is there any benefit to having the company spokesperson specifically highlighted for the brand during the crisis? They are the face in the media. They should also be forward-facing in a crisis, or should you continue to use your brand social sites with simply a logo?
Well, I think the case that I used with Progressive, that Progressive had Flo's smiling face, I think companies sometimes switch out their icons that they use, and if it's inappropriate, I don't think it's anything. I don't think there's anything wrong with switching it out. And as I said before, I think that comes with the planning process. That you think, how are we going to look if we're talking about something if we have this either such a happy face or a cartoon character or something that's just not appropriate for that. So maybe we should use a couple different icons that so, and again, I'm just going to go back, and I know I sound like a broken record, but I do this all the time, is planning, planning, planning. And once you run through these scenarios, you can figure out, and maybe you say, hey, let's have one in the bag just in case we're in a situation where we needed something that's not such a, yeah, Flo's a great spokesperson for them, but I think people understand and recognize when you're just trying to be sensitive to a situation.
Good. Actually, I'm going to throw a quick one in here, very, very current, very relevant. What's your opinion on how the Brian Williams situation has gone down, i.e. how NBC has handled this crisis?
I had my team come in to my office as we were, as you were asking the questions, because I can't stay up to date on everything. The Brian Williams crisis with NBC and how NBC has handled it is the question. it's not a social media question is what I'm hearing from somebody here. I'd like to hear something more specific because I haven't followed it that carefully.
Okay, we'll skip that one. That's okay. That's fine. We'll move into some other questions that have just come in. One of the participants today is interested in hearing about the idea of enabling dissenters and giving them too much power. Example, the right wing complaining about President Obama, and then they resign. You know, a staffer, for example, one of the congressmen complaining about Obama, then they resign, and it just kind of becomes a big part of the messaging, part of the news cycle. You know, they post something on their personal Facebook page, and next thing we know, they're on the hot seat and they have to resign from their post as the spokesperson for a member of Congress. What do you think about that?
Right. Well, having to resign, I mean, sorry, I'm trying to, my answer's going in about 5 different directions in my head. I think when somebody posts something, a dissenting view on social media, to respond to it is giving, there is some validity to, you know, do you want to give them too much power? Okay, the right wing complains about the Obama staffer and then they resign. But it depends if, as I said before, you know, some of the questions that you have to ask is what's the influence and power of the person that's there, of the source of where it's coming from, and is it worth is it worth responding? And then if you do, is to try to do it in a way that's not going to perpetuate the negative conversation. Dealing with politics in the White House and that type of crisis can be a very different situation because it's so high profile compared to a private company. But I think the key is really looking at, is this valid criticism that's based in fact, or is it just some nuts who are yelling on Twitter? And if it's some nuts that are just yelling on Twitter, then, you know, don't take it too seriously and go on your way. So I think you have to make those, you have to draw that distinction. And I think that's another thing that's part of your planning process, that you kind of figure out ahead of time, how are we going to handle this? And whatever field you're in, you're going to see examples of how it was handled well and how it was handled badly.
Great. Thank you, Gary. Well, it looks like we've just about run out of time. So, Rachel, if you could go to the closing slide, appreciate that. First of all, thank everyone for attending today's webcast and for Gary's very insightful presentation. We just want to do a quick pitch at the end. We have the IMCA Annual Conference and Showcase Gala coming up June 21 through 24th at the Hutton Hotel in Nashville. You could register online by going to imcanet.com, Nashville 2015. Our Showcase Awards program is also open, and as always, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And for those who joined us today for the first time and are not IMCA members, we certainly welcome you to check out our membership and to join our organization. Thank everybody for participating today and for those great questions, and we'll talk to you next time on our next webcast. Have a good day.